After graduation, I took 15 days at Fort George G. Meade on 15 June. I had been commissioned as a infantry officer in the U.S. Army Reserve, and my orders read, pending a regular Army appointment in field artillery. Of course, George G. Meade didn't know what to do with me, so they assigned me to a combat engineer battalion. And I was there for about 45 days before I got orders to go to Fort Sill. And I became very familiar with letters of indebtedness and how to respond to them and how to coach the troops on what they can do and can't do and trying to appease the creditors. And that's all I did for 45 days, except they found out that I was in pretty good shape, so I led PT every day. I then went to Fort Sill, and the first step was resigning my reserve commission and taking the oath in the regular Army as a field artilleryman. Actually, as an artilleryman, because in those days, the air defense and the field artillery were merged into one. If you remember, we wore cross cannons with a missile in the middle. Mm-hmm. My first assignment after the basic course was in Germany, serving in the largest combat command, and it was not a brigade yet. It was a battle group, and we had a heavy tank battalion, 2 tank battalions, or 3 regular tank battalions, 2 armored rifle mechanized battalions, and of course the direct support. And I was in direct support field artillery battalion. Served 3 years. It was a great assignment. You do everything. I was a forward observer, and then I became a battery executive officer, and I didn't get the command, but I was boosted up to the staff, and I became the brigade liaison, which is a senior captain position, and I was a junior lieutenant. And the battle group commander at that time was a brigadier general, and so was the Vardy commander. He put me in for a special award because he said I was the only artilleryman that ever came up there and gave him the advice that he expected to get. So I guess that was my only feather in the hat. I served 3 years in Germany, made captain in less than 3 years. It was the Vietnam buildup. Went to Fort Sill, took the advanced course. In those days, it was 6 months at Fort Sill, learning field artillery all over again. And I had just done just about everything. I had been a Fort Observer, fire direction officer, executive officer, and then on the staff. And of course, the liaison officers, when they aren't out liaisoning and advising the supported commanders, they work for the S3. So everything that they taught us in the career course, I had done in my first assignment. I was up on fire direction. I was up on tactics. So it was a piece of cake for me. And I ended up tutoring all the air defender guys in our section who were just lost in all the field artillery stuff. Mm. And I made some good friends. In fact, I guess I did such a good job. 2 of the 5 guys that I tutored or mentored became general's aides. So,
wow. Great.
Following that assignment, I went to Nam, of course. I volunteered. And I was stationed in the Mekong Delta, the Chinmui Mot Thao Bin, which is 91st Field Artillery Regiment in Sadek. And that is just north of, you've probably heard of Vinh Long, which is a big air station where we had staged helicopters out of. And it was an exciting tour. There's only one highway leading north and south. And you get on that highway, you go like hell. and the VC would set off and snipe at you. And I only had a ping on my Jeep. But I said, this is for the birds. And so I went out west one day to a special forces unit. And I said, hey, what can I do to get me an M79? They said, you need one? And I told them about getting sniped out all the time. And they said, yeah, you'll need a box of ammo too. And they gave me an M79, no serial number, no signing, nothing. They just gave it to me and a box of ammo. So when we go out, my driver and I'd sit on the road with my M79 and we'd get a sniper fire. Boom! I was only engaged other than that kind of things and receiving orders. In Sadek, we lived on a peninsula. It was a U.S. garrison, actually, of all advisors on a peninsula between the Sadek River and the Mekong River and a canal. And the VC would come up and they'd fire recoilless rifles and mortars at us. And they very seldom hit our station there. And because it was so narrow, it was only about 50 meters wide, about 140 meters long. And they were firing from the jungles and they weren't very accurate. So I was not in harm's way except on Easter Sunday, the night before. One of our battalions were spaced out, and we in two gun positions in parapets. And I'm sure you've seen the pictures of them. And in order to have an operation, we'd have to bring those guns together and go out and fire as batteries. Well, the night before, one of our platoons got hit and they destroyed one of the pieces, killed a couple of our soldiers, and they overrun the rough puffs, the regional forces that were protecting this little garrison. And so the division that I supported, the 9th ARVN Division, said, we're going to do an Eagle flight the next morning. And an Eagle flight was their top infantry company. And they take them out and where the intelligence said the VC would be, and they drop them in and go and get them. And me and my big brain decided that I was going to go along that day to be with the Forward Observer. We sat down. We were going to hit a dike right outside of a wood line. And when we went to set down on the dike, all hell broke loose. Mm. And that we took so much fire, the helicopters just went sideways and said, out. And we jumped into the paddy up to our necks. It was in the spring, of course, so it had lots of rainfall. The last chopper in got knocked out of the sky. The pilot, co-pilot were killed, and one of the door gunners killed, and the other one was blown clear, but he was in real pain. Wow. The captain, who was the advisor of the infantry company, the ARVN Infantry Company, he got hit, and his lieutenant took over. But we did nothing but lay behind the dike all day long. Every time somebody would get up, they'd get shot. The ARVN Company, which consisted of about 120 infantry soldiers, took 97 casualties that day. Only about 30 of them were killed. The rest of them were hit with something. I was one of the few, myself and the lieutenant, one of the few people on the ground that didn't take at least the shrapnel wound. The colonel who ran the aviation brigade sent in dust off to get the ARVN or the advisor to evacuate him, and the dust off got hit, and all that went ablaze, and everybody was killed in that dust off. The colonel was flying around, and him being a Medal of Honor winner from World War II. He was all blood and guts. Well, he went in and his chopper got hit. Now, he was able to get out of there, but only by the luck of, I guess, his good luck being a Medal of Honor winner. Other than that, I had no real combat experience, but that was enough for me. I left Vietnam, went to Fort Sill, and went to the school assignment, expecting to be an instructor, but they put me on the staff of the school. In
They wanted to learn your achievement.
I expected to be an instructor based on, lessons learned in Vietnam. Well, they put me in director of instruction's office. So instead of standing up and teaching, we wrote and developed curriculum based on lessons learned and forced it into the curriculum. And it was actually a very good assignment. I felt like I was using my 1 year experience in Vietnam so the younger soldiers, the basic course primarily was what I worked with. And then we had an Vietnam orientation course, which was a 4-week course for every field artilleryman came through the school before they went over to Vietnam the second time. That was a great assignment. Following that, I went back to Nam and served my second tour with the 101st Airborne. And I saw no combat. I was on the G3 staff. I did have some great things happen. I was doctrine, organization, and training. And the training, I oversaw the Screaming Eagle Replacement Training Center. And so I had the staff management for that. And they ran a sniper school. They ran it for the division snipers and for the Marine snipers. And those guys are awesome. We attracted every U.S. Army marksman team member that came to Vietnam went to become a sniper.
Right.
And they were very good. Guys are wrapping up 30, 40, 50 kills in a tour. And they'd go out in pairs. They'd drop them off and they'd hike for a couple days, but they'd stay out for about 10 days. Mm-hmm. They would overlook the trails where the North Vietnamese were bringing in their supplies, and they were very good at it, making kills and not hardly. I don't think we lost my whole year. We didn't lose one sniper. So
they use a silencer, Jim.
Oh yes, absolutely. If they didn't use the 50 caliber guns like we have now. They were using the 7.62, but it was all reconditioned, refined,
right?
Silencers, heavy duty telescopes, but they were getting kills at 300 meters, just like that. Of course, now it's 500 meters with the 50 cal.
Right.
But anyway, that was probably the highlight of my second Vietnam tour. And Camp Eagle was so big, it was shelled all the time. We never had anything come close to us. And I lived right on G Staff Row. You'd think that's where they would probably hit, but they always went after the heliports, and they were all over the place. But came back from Vietnam, and I thought they were putting me out to the farm because they sent me to be a National Guard advisor in New Hampshire. I lived 60 miles from the Canadian border in a town of 12,000. You would pronounce it Berlin. They pronounce it Berlin. And it was in a county called Coas. You would pronounce Coos. Half a river ran down, a very polluted river, polluted from all the paper mills. ran down the middle of the town. The Norwegians lived on one side, and all the French Canadians lived on the other side, and they fought each other all the time. But the comical thing about that assignment was they had a city council meeting every week, and it was on the radio. And the Berliners called it the comedy hour. My wife volunteered at the school, and she and another person, the only person she was able to connect with other than school teachers, was the wife of one of the executives for the Brown paper mill. They persuaded the school principal, twisted his arm, to open a library. So they actually took an old janitor's closet, cleaned it up, and started a lending library. They had all the books that nobody was using. And then my wife says, you know, that school is dirty, it's crusty. The playground is full of broken glass. We need to do something about it. So I wrote a petition, and she and her friend went out. I wrote a petition about this older kids playing on the elementary school playground and drinking and breaking bottles, causing a hazard for the young kids when they go out and play with cut knees and elbows. And so I wrote a petition, and I elicited that the town police would make routine checks in the evening. This is all happening at nighttime, of course, in the evening, and to include disembarking from their vehicles and making foot patrols. Well, this was read at the city council meeting, and the principal was up in arms. And he came right to me and he said, only you could have written this because you used words like disembark and foot patrols. And I said, I'm guilty. Let me take you for a walk around your playground, Mr. I know it's terrible, but this is what these people do. You know, this is just the way it is in this town. You're just not used to it. Well, there was one councilman whose wife was a school teacher, and he started flying the flag, and he got on the principal, got on the police department, and they cleaned up that playground. So
Awesome.
I made a community
Good story.
contribution. Being an advisor to that artillery battalion was a piece of cake. These guys loved it. They had the best maintenance I have ever seen. They either cut lumber or drove lumber trucks for the Brown Paper Company. The armory was their activity center. They would go there every night, work on their trucks, and then go have beer with the boys.
Every night.
And you walk into the communication center. You know who the sergeant was? He was a manager of the local Bell telephone. You know, you walk in the fire direction center. The school teacher who taught senior math at the high school, he was the chief fire direction officer, and it just went down the line. There was a 155 battalion, and they had the old towed pigs from World War II. And they said, did you have these in Vietnam? I said, well, yeah, I advised a battalion of 105s, but we had a 155 battery attached. He said, well, how'd they work the quick shift pedestal? And I said, I'll make a drawing for you. So I drew up the pedestal and how it was reinforced. And they call the steam fitter, local steam fitter, down. And he welds a couple of these things up, and that was their big deal. They go to summer camp, they would do quick shift pedestal shifting like we did in Vietnam.
Great.
So I guess I made a contribution, but I found out that the Army hadn't put me out to pasture because I came out on the Command General Staff and College list. And so I only served 27 months in Berlin, New Hampshire. But it was a kind of unique experience being there. The only thing I didn't care for was you're a next of kin notification person when you're an advisor in an area that has no military centers. And so I had to do that a couple of times, and that's not fun.
Wow.
But it is kind of a neat place. It's a small town atmosphere. And I'd walk down the street and you'd hear, here comes the major. And I was the major. They didn't have any majors around there. So I then went to the Command General Staff College. And with all our fast promotions, by this time I was a major. I only had 8 years in the service when I got promoted to major. And I hadn't commanded at the battery level. And of course, they said, quote, you were a senior advisor to an artillery battalion that's equivalent to command time. And I said, yeah, tell that to the boards when they're looking at two guys, this guy commanded U.S. troops in combat, and this guy advised an Arvin battalion. Who's going to get the nod? With only one of them, you can be selected. So I volunteered to go to Pershing Missiles, because Pershing has majors as battery commanders, because the batteries were 220 people and responsible for 9 nuclear tipped missiles. And they had a hard time getting people to volunteer to go to Pershing, because Pershing was a career eater if you didn't do well. But I got selected. I served as the S4 for 4 months. Battery commander got fired, and I took over his terrible battery. However, that's a good thing, because there's only one way to go, and that's up. And I commanded that battery for 26 months. Your normal, it's 18 months. And then I became the battalion operations officer. And then the last year, the new battalion commander, I was his operation officer for about 6 months. He said, will you extend 6 months to become my executive officer? But I need you for at least a year. And I said, okay. So I extended 6 months, and I was the executive officer. So Pershing was good to me. I got a command time, I got operations officer time, I got executive officer time. I went from there to Fort Sill, went to the school. This time I was chief of the guided missile division, which taught Pershing and Lance. And I had great instructors, really highly motivated. It was a piece of cake. And I did that for, 3 complete years. And then I came out on the battalion command list. And lo and behold, guess where I went? Back to Pershing. And I went back to the same battalion that I had been the commander, operation officer XO, and took command. And I commanded again for 26 months as a battalion commander, and the normal tour was 24. So the brigade commander said, well, you've done a really good job being a battalion commander. I want you to be my chief of staff. I had come out on the 06 list. And he said, but you're going to have to extend. I said, oh, shit, this is getting old with Pershing. So I had to extend, and I became the chief of staff. And at this time, we were deploying Pershing 2. And if you remember, Pershing 2 was a very accurate missile system, and we extended the range so it would shoot, instead of 18,000 kilometers, this thing would go, it could hit Moscow from Germany. And so, and with high accuracy. P1A, you could get into maybe a football field if you were lucky. This thing was within 10 meters of the target because it had terminal guidance.
Oh,
We started deploying those. We deployed a battalion in Schwäbisch Gmünd. That's where the brigade headquarters was. And we would meet every day. I would meet every day with the chief of police and their equivalent to our FBI counterintelligence people and map out, where the demonstrators were going to be and how we were going to cope with them and of course they took full charge of everything. They protected us. They did an outstanding job, but it was a hit and miss situation. One night, demonstrators went to where that battalion stored its missiles, parked its missiles. And of course, we had the fences and the lights and the sensors. And this kid was crawling across the field, this demonstrator. And one of our soldiers said, "Halt." And, he spoke it in German. We taught him how to say it in German. And ich schießen, halt, oder ich schießen. And the kid kept coming. So the guard fired a round over his head. The kid stood up and he kept coming. The guard fired another into the dirt in front of him, and the kid hit the dirt and, held his hands up. And I told the general the next morning, I said, we need to go up and give that guard a medal. And he said, you're right. He said, I have the authority to give up to Army Commendation Medal. And we did that in front of the whole battery up on the field where it happened. And I'll tell you what, you want to tell these soldiers that they're important, just something like that will tell them, oh yeah, this is an important mission. When I was the battalion commander, I was the closest battalion to Heidelberg. And so all the VIPs that would come to Heidelberg, if they were to get a Pershing missile demonstration, they would fly to my battalion. And I had the Navy admiral that, became the senator, just died, or he hadn't died yet. Anyway, he came to visit me and we put on a show for him. And he said, I'm sorry to have to hassle your troops like this. He said, but this is what they schedule. And I said, I'm not sorry at all, Admiral. I said, I keep telling these soldiers how important they are. And when people like you visit, that just reinforces what I've been telling them. And he said, well, glad I could accommodate you. But we put on shows probably once or twice a month. And what we did was have a mock countdown of a missile that did not have a real warhead on. We only kept live warheads on 2 of the platoons. So that was 6. The other 3 were in standby. So we would put a training warhead on it, and we do a countdown demonstration. And the thing, that missile, which weighs almost 4 tons, would erect in 9 seconds. So it was a very impressive event. Hosted Loretta Lynn, and she jumped and put her arms around me when that missile went to erect. She was scared to death. But when she found out that the soldiers that were on that site that gave her the demonstration couldn't come to the show that night at the caserne, she put an impromptu show on in our mess hall on the site. So following that Pershing assignment, I missed out on an assignment. I went from Fort Sill to the Army staff. The battalion commander that had gotten me to extend to become his executive officer was the division chief on the Army staff in the nuclear division. And he said, Jim, I need you to come up here. And I said, no, I don't want to come to the Army staff, sir. He said, I need you to come up here. He kept asking me, and I kept saying no. Finally, one day, right around Christmas, he called me and he said, you're getting orders. And I said, oh, damn. So I went to the Army staff. And what his problem was, he had all the prefix 5 guys. These are the guys that, not prefix 5, the guys who are nuclear physicists for the Army. And he said, I got all the bomb builders and all the knowledge I need about making warheads, nuclear warheads. I don't have one soldier who's been out in the field and operated them. He said, you're the man. You're going to make some common sense to these guys and tell them why this won't work in the field, or why it's a good thing for the soldier, or why it's a bad thing for the soldier. So I did that for 30 months. And then I came out on the battalion command list and went to Germany. So, but after all that was done, the Army in all its wisdom was supporting the talks with the Russians on the intermediate nuclear forces. So they sent me to the Joint Staff as a Pershing guy, and I worked for the negotiating staff in J5, and we supported and provided negotiators for the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And when we got the treaty in 1989, we had 6 months to implement it. And so my shop was in charge of overseeing the implementation and supporting the services. And so we drew up what we thought it would take to implement the treaty as far as inspection regime and escorting regime. And we took it in the tank, and we had been I made 39 briefings in the tank to the chiefs of staff, joint chiefs of staff, because arms control was really hot then in a 3-year tour. But anyway, I went in and I told them that we had put together what we thought would be an organization that could implement the treaty, totally manned by the military. And we had a position for a liaison with state, liaison with the FBI for counterintelligence, and of course a liaison with the Department of Energy. And that was it. The rest of it was all military. And we were going to use all the Russian foreign area specialists from the services to make them inspection heads. Now, the chiefs approved it. The chairman took it across the river, told the president, not in session, just took the president aside and said, sir, you know about the treaty. And Reagan said, yeah, isn't it grand that we got that treaty? And the chairman said, yes, it is, because it's very much to our advantage. But we have to implement that inspection regime. We only have about 4 more months to do it in. So we need to put together an organization. And I just want you to know that if you decide that the military should do it and give me the order to do so, I'm prepared to hit the ground running. And President Reagan looked at him and said, well, who the hell else would do it? And the chairman said, well, if you ask State Department or ACTA, Arms Control Disarmament Agency, they might think they should be responsible. And the president said, they'd never make it happen. Go. And so we went and we put it together. We assigned a major general to be the commander. Only when the interagency got word of it, and it ended up that we had a general as the director of the agency. It was a Department of Defense agency. But we ended up with a deputy from state, a deputy from the FBI, and a deputy from ACTA, all civilians.
Oh,
And of course, we ignored them, but they were there in place. But we implemented the treaty, and at the same time, we were negotiating a memorandum of understanding with the Soviets on how we would implement, and with all the rules. And that thing was more difficult than getting the treaty, especially because we wanted to use a radar to look through the box cars or rail cars that came out of a plant that used to build the missiles in Russia. And at one point in time, I became the executive secretary for the U.S. delegation in Geneva, and I served in that capacity for about 2 years. And so I guess that was kind of the highlight when they say soldier and diplomat. You know, I carried the black passport. So I was never thought in my mind that I would become a diplomat, because I always looked down at the guys from state who used to push their glasses on their nose, and we would mimic them and do it with our middle finger. But it was a very wide open experience. I'm proud that we were able to put that organization together and implement the treaty, and the world became a better place to live, because that was the kickoff, you know, the ABM treaty, but that was a real treaty that started all the retalking of the starts. And we went to the start 1 and start 2, and now we're talking about the continuation of it, even though Trump canned the INF treaty, which was not a very good move, because that allows the Russians to make another intermediate nuclear missile. And they have the intermediate range missiles. We don't. So they can figure out how to put a nuke on it and hold Europe a threat again. And that's what Pershing and ground launched cruise missile took away that threat. I retired after 30 years on the 3rd of July in 1992. I then worked for Analytical Services, which is a Beltway bandit, but we think we're unique. It's a not-for-profit organization that serves only for the national security and the interests of national security of the United States. Lo and behold, I've worked 16 years for that company. The last 12 years, I was right back in the Pentagon on the Joint Staff in the J5 in the same division that I had been the division chief for. And I did that for 12 years. And I mentored all the new Joint Staff guys that came in there. And I was a principal policy analyst, and I had the ear of the J5 whenever he needed it. And I was well known on the staff. I mean, not pat myself in the back, but when you stay that long, you become familiar to everybody.
What a career.
So
Wow.
I retired from that position. I moved to Fredericksburg while I worked for Answer for another year, and then retired. And following that, my only claim to fame is being the president of our HOA. And I resigned from that after 8 years last year. And we had a Zoom. We're still holding the meetings, the community meetings by Zoom, virtual meetings. And I got on that meeting at 7 o'clock this evening, and I bitched at the board. Told them I had 2 or 3 observations and 4 questions, and I needed answers on behalf of the community. And so I'm still got a little bit of power left in the community, and I'm
Still
driving
fighting.
in the right direction.
Still
But I'm
fighting.
not responsible for all that worry anymore. So that's in a nutshell. That's Jim Loftus. I retired as a colonel.
All right.
In
Thank
a
you.
nutshell.
And I tell you what, I love being a soldier.
Mhm.
That was fantastic, Jim. I really appreciate that. One thing I don't think you did not mention is the fact that you lost your class ring somewhere in Germany.
I did. I was battalion commander, and I got up one morning, washed, and I looked down and my ring wasn't there. And told Sergeant Major, I said, damn, I lost my ring somewhere. Well, it bothered him and he went out, got a payphone, called my home, asked Cork if I had left it, in the bathroom or something. And I said, no, I know I had that ring, but I lost it. So, and someday I expect somebody's going to send me that ring.
Yes,
Because it has J.S. Loftus in it.
yes.
But
Right.
one day in our little luncheon, PMC luncheon group, John Blair said, hey, do you like my new ring? He's holding up class ring. And I said, I tried to replace my ring. I called Balfour, or my family did. They were going to surprise me. My sons and my wife, and they called Balfour and they said, what year? And he's 1962. And they said, oh, we only keep the mold for so long and then we destroy them. And we destroyed that one last year. So he told me about it, and I said, okay, I guess I can't get a ring. Well, John Blair said, yes, you can. So I contacted them. They said, yes, we will make it by hand.
Oh, wow.
I'm wearing a new ring.
Awesome.
Wow.
All right.
Now, I don't want to tell you what it cost,
Mhm.
but we paid for these originally about $50-$60.
Yes.
Yeah.
They
Yep.
had 1,200 on top of that 60.
Oh,
Wow.
But what? It's worth it.
It's worth
absolutely.
I got
Great.
the ring now.
Absolutely, Jim.
Okay.
Thanks for sharing, Jim.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Jim, there was a term you used, and maybe everybody was familiar with it. And you said something about dust off.
Yeah.
What is that?
Okay, yeah, dust off was the heliborne ambulances.
Ah, okay.
Dust off was their call sign.
They were medevacs.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Didn't Paul Sykes fly dust off? Or George Horn?
George Horn probably did. He was involved in Chopper.
Yeah, same way with Larry Liss. I don't know if he flew.
Yeah, I was thinking about Larry Liss, and his story is well known
Yeah.
about his helicopter experiences. Thanks for sharing. That was
Yes.
wow.
Really appreciate it, Jim.
I love being a soldier.